To record, now we're live.
All
Take it
right.
away.
Okay, so we are so excited to see a good turnout here, board members. Thank you for taking the time to come. We have a presentation today to talk about some funding in not just the region, but where it comes from, state and federal, what goes into all of the money that we see come through the region. We just had a transportation committee meeting today that we talked about our regional funding round that will be coming to the board in a few weeks. There were also some other items on there for transit funding. There was the state SB 125. We're constantly talking about funding. So it's a really timely topic to dive a little bit more into, being in the middle of the funding round, but also as we start to talk about revenues associated with our blueprint and some of the work that's going over there. So we invited Kiana Valentine here today from Transportation California to come and give an overview of this very complicated subject of transportation funding. So I'm going to turn it over to her to go over that.
Great, thank you so much. And I think it might just bear acknowledgement that I serve a few hats, and you may have seen me previously at board meetings or in other committees as one of your two state lobbyists here in Sacramento. But pleased to join you here as Executive Director of Transportation California, which, as you may or may not know, is a statewide organization that was created in the late 90s. It's a labor management organization that advocates for dedicated, sustainable funding for multimodal transportation infrastructure. I've been with the organization, this is my 6th year. But the organization has been credited with working on things like Proposition 1B back in 2006, SB 1, and the effort to defeat the repeal of Proposition 6 in 2017 and 18 respectively. Prior to that, even had its hands in Proposition 42, which is now defunct for the most part, but was the effort to redirect the portion of sales tax on gasoline from the general fund to support transportation programs. So pleased to be part of this organization and have the opportunity to chat with you all about some state and federal transportation funding programs, revenue projections, and policy issues. The title is long-winded. I tend to be long-winded. I am going to try to stay on task and on topic. As Christina mentioned, we could get deep into any single one of these issues, let alone trying to cover a lot of ground in the time we have today. So happy to be here, and we'll get started with the next slide and see where we go.
I think you got the clicker.
Oh, I have the clicker. That's good. Okay, so the first part of the presentation that we just wanted to remind everyone of, I'm going to review major sources of state transportation funding and our major state transportation funding programs. Multimodal programs, highways, local streets and roads, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, transit, the whole gamut. And then I'll do the same thing for the federal side before we start talking about funding projections and sort of what's next in terms of policy issues. I think the most infamous, the most famous funding source for our transportation infrastructure is the excise tax on gasoline. Right now it is 57.9 cents in total. That includes the base rate that has been around in some manner since the 1920s, I think is when our gas tax was established in the state. It's 18 cents now, adjusted for inflation every year since the passage of SB 1. We have the sales tax replacement rate, which was the thing we did in 2010 and 11, where we replaced the sales tax on gasoline with a price-based excise tax increment. That was super fun to figure out and adjust on an annual basis. We sort of set that at a flat rate with SB 1, and that is now adjusted for inflation. And then the SB 1 rate, which is the 12-cent increase that SB 1 applied in 2017. Cumulatively, that make up the gasoline excise tax. And again, that's adjusted for inflation July 1 of every year. That is the rate as of today. It will go up, I think, 1.4 or 1.7 cents July 1 of this year. We also have a transportation improvement fee. This was also a function of SB 1. Unlike a registration fee, although it's levied at time of registration, it is a variable rate depending on the value of your car. So a car that is $4,999 or less in value pays $25. And at the highest end, someone with a higher end vehicle could pay up to $175 a year. Those things are also adjusted for inflation. The road improvement fee, I put its proper title on here. I sort of forgot that it was called the road improvement fee. This is also known as the ZEV fee. This is the $100 fee that if you own a zero emission vehicle are paying at time of registration. This too is adjusted for inflation. I think, as that adjusted for inflation clause can sort of cut both ways. We do feel inflationary impacts when we pay at the pump and register our vehicles, but it really has allowed us to maintain sufficient, or at least better than we were doing pre-SB1, transportation funding to improve our streets, roads, bike ped, transit, all the things. I didn't include any of the details on here, but the state's website is particularly good at showing you where your SB1 dollars are going at the city level, county level, legislative district, and or by type of investment. So if you ever are curious where your dollars are going, and a lot of folks are curious, you'll recall there were a period of time where there was a lot of state borrowing. The state would borrow city, county, state increments of revenue. Those sorts of things, we have not seen any borrowing in almost a decade now. SB1 was accompanied by a constitutional initiative, Prop 69, I think is what it ultimately was, and really sort of locked down in such a way that the state has been unable to borrow any gas tax or other transportation dollars since that was done. So if you want to see where those monies are going, I'd visit the Rebuilding California website for that information. There's also sales tax, and I will amend this presentation and get it back to you with some additional edits. Sales and excise tax on diesel, and then truck weight fees are something that also fund transportation in California. So those are the major sources. Are there smaller sources, other things? Yes, but those are the big ones that we talk about. This slide, I just tried to pick the most significant, the most relevant, but again, by no way, shape, or form is this inclusive of all of the state transportation programs in California. Has anyone seen Chart C that Caltrans reproduces? It's like a 3x5 piece of paper, font size 6. That is comprehensive of state and federal transportation funding and programs. But I wanted to talk about the ones that I think are probably most relevant to SACOG as you all do your funding round and implement your blueprint. And the first up is the State Transportation Improvement Program, 75% of which is programmed here at the region. The other, that's a regional transportation improvement program. The other 25% Caltrans programs through the adoption of the interregional transportation program. And that's done every couple of years. So there's an opportunity to get new projects in every 2 years. There's also SB1 competitive grant programs, trade corridor enhancement program. SACOG should be very familiar with that, as you just received approval from the Transportation Commission at the May meeting for an advance on TSEP to fund an important project here in the region. There's solutions for congested corridors, local partnership program, which many components of SACOG access given the sales tax measures locally here, and then the active transportation program. Another key one that SACOG doesn't necessarily program or sort of have a role in that I'm really aware of is the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, but those maintenance and improvement projects certainly benefit the district. And those projects are programmed every couple of years and benefit each county and the region as a whole. And then there are several transit programs. Let me actually just a quick caveat. There's been a lot of attention in Sacramento as we're debating budgets and we have surpluses and deficits and, how do we sort of make heads or tails of all of that? The STIP is a multimodal program. I think a lot of, there's a perception that it's primarily a highway funding program, and highways are certainly an eligible use for that, but transit is also an eligible use, as well as other multimodal aspects. SB1 competitive grant programs, trade corridor enhancement, primarily focused on improvement of highways to get freight faster, more reliable, but those projects can also have bicycle and pedestrian components in them, right? So same with the active transportation program. In order to build a safer bike or pedestrian facility, you may need some sort of aspects of a highway project to make the whole thing work together. So I really view all of those programs in a multimodal lens. The transit programs, that may be true to some extent, the highway incorporate sort of touching on highway or other improvements, but those feel a lot more sort of transit focused to me. Particularly transit and intercity rail capital program. That was the beneficiary of additional money under SB1. And as you probably just talked about with SB 125 and other things, there was general fund. There was not general fund. Then we backfilled it with cap and trade dollars. So we're working as a state to sort of maintain to the greatest extent possible the commitments to TCEP or TIRCP and some of these other programs there. Should I take a pause before I turn to federal, or do you want to hold comments and questions to the end? Yeah? Okay,
I do think you should, even though this is a committee meeting, you should all feel you can jump in with questions.
I have a question relating to the excise tax. You said SB1, that they hadn't borrowed against SB1. And I don't know, I thought by nature excise tax is something that isn't specifically for one thing. It actually can be moved around or reallocated. So I was curious to know why they couldn't borrow from it.
There have been a series of constitutional amendments to Article 19, which is the section of the Constitution that governs protection of these dollars. And it locks down for very specific purposes, highways, local streets and roads, and transit capital projects. Gas tax can really only be used for those core functions. All of those things have been, for the most part, closed. I will say, in all fairness, there is a provision that if the state has cash flow, emergency cash flow issues, and there's a state of emergency fiscal declaration by the legislature, there can be short-term borrowing, but the minute those revenues become available, they are required to go back into the accounts for which they came. And since that has passed in 2017, or 2018, it was passed in that initiative in November, we have not seen anything. And really, even in the years preceding the passage of SB1.
And I was thinking Governor Newsom had reallocated 500 million of SB1 to something else, but I can't remember what it was.
There have been various proposals over the years, but I think generally the transportation industry writ large, whether it be sort of Transportation California's bread and butter membership or regional and city county agencies, have successfully pushed back on all of those proposals.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So on the federal side, you see very similar lineup of taxes and fees, right? We have a gas excise tax. It's much less than it is in California on the federal side. They have not touched their gas tax since, I believe, 1994. So the same thing that led us to pass SB1 and increase the gas tax in California, inflationary impacts, fuel efficiency, just really degrading the ability to use those dollars. Just has not been addressed at the federal level, and that I think is relevant to the next part of our conversation. There's a diesel excise tax, special fuel taxes. This one was new to me. I was unaware of a tire tax we pay at the federal level, a trailer sales tax. There is a heavy vehicle use tax similar to our heavy duty truck fee here. And then I've been in transportation 20 years now, and I think every federal program we've passed there have been fund transfers. The Highway Trust Fund has not been solvent for many years, primarily because the gas tax hasn't been increased in those decades. So at the federal level, there's a lot of special fund and general fund transfers to maintain the federal program. And again, you see very similar suites of programs. On the federal side, this list would be 100 bullets long if I tried to put all the different programs. So I just, again, picked the most relevant. The Regional Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which SACOG has a role in, programming and spending, same with CMAC or the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program. Both of those are part of the fund, effort, right? And then there is just a plethora of competitive grant programs. And to that point, one observation is IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, increased federal funding for transportation significantly, far more than we have seen it in again, my sort of 20-year time horizon. A majority of that went into new and increased competitive grant programs. I, by and large, would not characterize IIJA as raising up formula programs that come to your region. And so as we look to the next surface transportation reauthorization, I think many of us are going, what is going to happen next? Are we going to go back to FAST Act numbers? Are we going to stay at IIJA levels? Are we going to be somewhere in the middle? And we have an election in November that may or may not influence that. We have high inflation. We have all of the things that are sort of influencing that right now. I can say there is conversations about what to do with the gas tax in the next reauthorization. I'm not going to speculate as to whether Congress and the president can figure out what to do with the federal revenue streams.
Actually, you just got to that because I was just curious where, if we wanted to point to, where should we focus? Is it literally Congress that will say, hey, we're going to invest more in grant programs, or is it at the administration level, Secretary of Transportation?
I think it's both, but I would start with Congress is my sort of gut reaction to that. Because I'm not involved in the day-to-day on the federal side of things, I wasn't really as involved in what IIJA and how that came to be. I know this administration played a pretty big role in putting that together, maybe more than previous administrations had in federal reauthorization. But my gut is that we're going to see something more like business as usual, Congress putting together a package, working with the administration. So would you, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And maybe I want to just, Director Branscombe, we were talking about the transit fiscal cliff earlier in the Transportation Committee. This is its own fiscal cliff, because if you think about 18 cents a gallon since 1994, right? Stuck at that price, not adjusted for inflation in terms of revenue. And then actually IIJA did a huge boost in funding. Kiana's right. Most of that's in competitive grant programs that you've all come to know and love. But that gap now between the sustainability of that gas tax revenue and what has been added in is a bigger and bigger gap, right? And if Congress this next time out in a couple of years when they come to reauthorize is willing to fill that gap, and how they're willing to fill that gap is like a critical question.
We can get to whole fund. I've lived in Dallas for a number of years, Highland Park, and the roads I drove on, my little thing went off and cost me some money, and it was very convenient.
Yeah.
One of the people working for my lady friend was using those and couldn't afford them. We had to subsidize. We've seen that one. It seems like we got the very beginning of it, at least in this region. I don't know about the other regions, and it's regional management versus some statewide coverage.
In terms of management.
Uh,
I didn't really want to be heard. Anyway, I'm wondering I don't, maybe you're going to cover that in revenue here, but what the outlook would be for that. Because further to the point that James was just making, that is a source of funding. And with all of the different electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, and the problems in collecting for the usage of the roads. I've gone into deep enough.
You're teeing up the next few slides perfect.
I apologize.
No worries. It's a great segue. I'll just note too that I listed a handful of the really important transit, both formula and competitive grant programs that benefit SACOG, its member cities, counties, and transit agencies. But now we can get into like the really big stuff, right? which is what is going on with the projections of our transportation funding, both at the state and federal level. So even before SB 375, the federal government was incentivizing, mandating, pushing the car market to increase fuel efficiency of our vehicles, right? That really started happening in sort of the 90s and 2000s. So I generally refer to it as the state's decarbonization efforts leading to a disruption in transportation funding mechanisms, but it really has been sort of a slow-moving issue for many decades. So in addition to just general fuel efficiency of our gas and diesel powered vehicles, now we have the advent of electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, zero emission vehicles on the market. A couple of data points for just reference, and know that these to me seem like really, really educated guesses, but there are so many factors that are going to influence the rate at which fleets turn over to zero emission vehicles, not the least of which is availability of charging infrastructure, price parity so that consumers can afford to buy these vehicles, the infrastructure sort of feelings of range anxiety and how people use their cars. So lots of factors, availability of clean electricity. So, right, just like so many different factors can influence these numbers. But CARB, in their adoption of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, which is the regulation that implements the governor's mandate to zero emission vehicle new car sales by 2035, $48.8 billion lost to the state from 2026 to 2040. That is basically 10 years of SB1 will be lost over a 14-year period in 2026. That's in addition to a loss of federal gas tax receipts. The feds have generally backfilled the Highway Trust Fund, so we don't necessarily feel the impact as we do in the state when sort of gas tax revenue dries up. But we're going to see another drop in $25 billion in 2035 with federal gas tax receipts. I just shared a couple of other factors, again, sort of trying to guess at the influence of these regulatory schematics and when we're going to really feel the pinch of the change. By 2032, it's projected that up to 67% of light duty ZEVs, that sales, 67% of sales are going to be zero emission vehicle in the light duty sector and up to 52% in the heavy duty sector. And that by model year 27-28, we could see cost parity with a zero emission vehicle and its traditional counterpart.
Real quick, I'd be shocked if Newsom's 2035 comes to pass. But yesterday, the CEO of General Motors, Mary Barra, announced that General Motors would not be producing anything but electric vehicles come 2035. Surprised me, but it ties into these concerns.
Yeah. A quick note, because this slide can be scary, and I want it to both scare us and also bring some level of comfort though. SB1 revenue collections, because of the inflationary factor, because it's not just gas tax, it's per vehicle, certain fees are being levied. In the next 5 to 7 years, SB1 revenue collections are continuing to grow. Maybe not at the pace we would otherwise see if the entire fleet was internal combustion engine, but they are still growing, at least in sort of the midterm. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, unclear the level of federal funding in the next authorization. So I wanted to talk about two sort of hot topics in the policy space. It's road user charge program, or an effort to sort of future-proof, if you will, state transportation funding, and then also we'll get to pricing. California has been testing an effort to replace the gas tax with a per mile fee or road user charge since 2013. 37 other states are doing research and pilots. There have been a tremendous amount of advances in the last decade with respect to what consumers are okay with, what sort of mechanisms are available for revenue generation, although many, many obstacles exist for replacing the gas tax or otherwise shoring up transportation funding. I just highlighted a few recent reports that I thought were really sort of illuminating, in particular, the financial impacts of a road user charge on super commuters, which is something I can tell you that the construction industry is very concerned about, right? With its workforce basically driving every day to get to work, sometimes very significant distances. And what was interesting is that a road charge can actually make certain aspects of paying for infrastructure more equitable. Because those in the construction world, just by way of example, are driving F-150 trucks to the job site, and they are paying more gas tax than someone in a Nissan Leaf right now, or a Tesla, or even my car, which is a hybrid 8-seatbelt car that still gets 35 miles to the gallon, right? So it actually does have some potential to bridge some equity challenges, but it's not ubiquitous or sort of consistent across the board, right? I will encourage anyone and everyone to go on to the Road Charge Pilot website and sign up for the next pilot if you're interested in sort of getting a touch and a feel for it yourself. This one will actually collect revenue. In the past, they just gave you paper bills, so you got to like sort of look and touch and feel what it might look like. But this will be, you will pay a road user charge, and then you will have a rebate for the gas tax that you pay at the end of it as well. So among the many considerations and obstacles, the gas tax is incredibly cheap to administer because I think it's like 12 points throughout the state, right? That it is collected, and then we pay the gas station, and that gets funneled up to the state. Road user charge would be every single motorist on the road. That's a lot more sort of touch points, if you will. A lot of focus on technology. How are you going to report that data? I participated in the first pilot. I took a snapshot of my odometer once a month and submitted it in an app. You could, on a lower tech side, just pay for a permit. I'm going to drive 12,000 miles and it's going to cost me this much, and that is the end of it. On the other end, there's in-car telematics, right? So there's really a range of different options for technology. Privacy is a huge issue that we talk about in this space. Fairness and equity, public awareness and acceptance. Mineta Transportation Institute has been studying public perception on this topic for over a decade. And I was kind of surprised to see that. I was not surprised to see that public acceptance for road charge was at the very bottom. But at the top was support for like a 15-cent gas tax increase and 20 other things before road charge. So if we are going to go this direction, there is a lot of work that needs to be done between now and then, right? Eligible uses, this is a policy issue, right? Right now we have gas tax locked down for very specific purposes. You cannot use it for transit operations. CARB wants to open up Article 19 in its most recent scoping plan, said make it eligible for transit operations. I get that transit operations is a needed area of investment, but at the cost of other transportation infrastructure isn't going to actually solve the problem, right? And then threat of initiative, I could only imagine when we do this, we would likely see another Prop 6, right? Trying to repeal the gas tax. So that's something that we have to consider too. Okay, pricing, the other sort of newer topic. Oh yes, road charge.
Well, thank you. Could you back up to the next slide? So who has been having these conversations in terms of, you know, the concept? I mean, we've talked about it conceptually, but I don't think we haven't dove into it.
Yeah.
You know, and some things that come to mind, you know, I get the nuance of like how much you're using it, whether you're driving a F-150 or a Leaf, but there's also simplicity, right? And equitable equity in if you had a flat fee for anybody who has a driver's license, right? Why should Pat pay more to go to the gym? He's going 4 days a week. I'm going 1 day a week, but maybe we pay the same membership dues. Or I watch more Netflix, right?
It's not a good example.
Than Oscar. I mean, No, but the thing, but my point is, right, we're all paying the same membership, you're paying virtually the same. So I'm just wondering, you could do away with all this cost of administration and everything if simply you maintain your driver's license, you're gonna pay a road fee. And because you have more people paying into it, the cost might go down.
I think nationally and in the state of California, the framework has always been user pay. The same way you use more electricity in one household, well, that might not be a very good example anymore. But under previous constructs, you pay more if you use more. And the same has always sort of traditionally applied to how we've provided transportation infrastructure as well. And the gas tax was just a proxy for that, right? Which now no longer holds up because of our fuel sources and fuel economy. Let me go back to your first question. But that's the debate that has to be had. What are we willing to sort of, what are the trade-offs we're willing to live with to achieve simplicity? And what are the trade-offs we're not willing to sort of live with to achieve simplicity, if sort of simplicity is the baseline, right? There is a road user charge technical advisory committee, the RUCTAC. They meet quarterly. They just met last week. And it is run through the California Transportation Commission. Caltrans has a dedicated team working on this issue. If you want to know more about this issue at the state level, I highly recommend bringing Lauren Prahota in to talk with you about it. She is a fantastic public speaker and just incredibly knowledgeable about this stuff. And then I'm happy to report that Transportation California and the construction industry is starting to really pay this issue a lot of attention. Pardon?
Oh, I said, I bet.
Yeah.
It's
For
gonna
many
cost them more
reasons.
money.
For many reasons. And so we're gonna start working on what the next right step is. I will tell you, I'm really intrigued by what Utah has done and see the need to do a very slow ramp up, if you will, at least from the state perspective. Utah is just charging road user charge on those zero emission vehicles. So if you still have a gas car, you're gonna pay at the pump. There is some sort of, potential lost revenue based on your fuel efficiency, but it's not like overnight doing away with gas. Like, what are we gonna do with the gas stations? There's so many different factors to think about. So I really like the concept of sort of a slow ramp up, and it transitions as the fleet transitions over time.
Okay, thank you very
That
much.
good?
Can we do that? Can we have her come in?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Lauren. Or you're welcome.
Right.
Okay, so again, I said I'm long-winded. I know I've gone over my allotted time, but if you want me to keep going, I'll just run through the pricing slide and then I'll turn it back over to you. Pricing is going to have to play some role in the state of California if we are going to raise revenue to provide sufficient multimodal infrastructure to give Californians options to safely move about the state. It is also a critical policy component from my perspective in meeting the state's greenhouse gas emissions reductions and your ability to be able to meet your blueprint goals. The 4 largest MPOs currently have high occupancy toll conversion projects in their long-range transportation plans, including SACOG. The goals of that are, yes, GHG and VMT reduction, improving bus transit utilization and reliability, encouraging carpooling, all the things that sort of are an ecosystem in support of reduced GHGs, and then of course the modernizing how we generate revenue. This has a roadway pricing working group to get to your point, like how do regions want to do it? How can the state help regions achieve those goals, but hopefully not a state mandated approach to how you do it, right? Allowing regional flexibility.
Remember crossing Bay Bridge for 35 cents. Was it 5 or 7?
More than that, maybe?
Right. And
7
that's
to
a
9.
penny pop.
Yeah.
It's not used to keep the bridge paid.
Okay, I am not an expert on that, so I will not.
The-
Yeah.
It seems the real challenge is the change in technology for powering transport. Individual automobile transport and hydrogen, electric, gasoline, diesel, what have you. And as those changes come in, that's what creates the issues. There's going to be some losses of revenue here. How do you pick it up? Are you going to trust people to take pictures of their odometer? What a nightmare that will be to manage. This is going to be incredibly challenging. And it's all driven by changes or evolutions in technology.
Yes. So in preparing, I am not a pricing expert. The good news is SACOG does have pricing experts now, and you have CARTA, and you've created this infrastructure and framework to be able to figure out pricing as it relates to the larger Sacramento region. But in putting this presentation together, I had to recall, can you take a general purpose to an HOT lane, and what are the steps? And so I went back to some Caltrans resources, and at least according to the most recent information they've shared, there is a process whereby you are able to take a general purpose lane or an HOV lane and get it to a high occupancy tolled lane. So there is a CTC program, again, which SACOG just went through the AB 194 process, if you will, the approval to create a toll facility. And I think we are going to see more and more focus on pricing going forward. Let's see. I think I did some redundant information there. I apologize. I was trying to boost up these couple of slides in the remaining hours this morning. So again, it seems like FHWA has confirmed that there is a process by how you get a general purpose or HOV lane to a hot lane. And so I bring this up just to say that this is also front of mind at the state. It's certainly something the construction industry is caring and interested in, and something that SACOG is actively involved in. And I'll stop there if that works.
Is this slide deck available?
I'm gonna clean it. There's a few things I'd like to add to it, and then I'll get it back to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we can send it out afterwards. That's sort of the end of the presentation, but we wanted to make sure we left a little bit of time for any kind of discussion that maybe didn't happen during it. You know, hopefully your wheels are turning, thinking about what this means for the funding round, how much funding we have available in the coming years, because that's sort of unknown. But also in terms of the blueprint, what it means for what some of our assumptions will be on the transportation side and what we're going to do there. So if you don't have questions now or anything to add, that's okay. You can always reach out to us directly and we can have conversations about it. But hopefully this was really good kind of background for you as we go into some of the more difficult decision-making processes that will be before you all in the next month or year.
Chris, when did you pay 35 cents on the Bay Bridge? Because when the Antioch Bridge was built and like finished in 78, it was 50 cents.
Pamela, I'm old.
Oh, geez.
Oh my God.
I have a request though. Yeah, I think, because we have talked about having this type of conversation, so maybe it's more appropriate when the person that's in charge of it at CTC would,
Yeah.
comes and speaks to us.
Yeah, I'm
Actually, so-
sending a note right now about it.
Mm-hmm.
We could figure out a way to work it in. I think we're pretty booked with luncheons, if I'm correct, for the rest of the year, but we could find other ways to get her to come. That'd
Okay,
be great.
I'm curious. I mean, just because you mentioned F-150s and stuff again, and maybe today I have a F-150 and tomorrow I decide to move or I decide to drive a Leaf, and then you're gonna have to administer and adjust payment on that. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It just, human nature, things can change, right? So,
You could get a Lightning and not have to give up the
Truck or the-
F-150 orientation.
A
You don't
what?
have to go to a Leaf.
A Ford Lightning,
Oh,
right?
got
Yeah.
it.
I've never heard the equity argument in favor of, or worrying about F-150 drivers. I really like that. We've got F-150s, don't we, buddy?
Preserving choice, that's all. I'm just trying to.
I'm a victim.
We had, ran a 100 V8 and I had a them gets about 15 miles per gallon, the other at about 25. And when I plugged in the numbers into the simulator, based on the average mileage that we drive, the road usage taxing obviously depends on what the value is, but it costs the Tucson driver more money than the gas tax does, but it saves the Ram 1500 driver over the gas tax. So it's actually a cost saving for that to switch to that. My wife would save money and I pay more. But anyway, so it's an interesting, I know often and rightly so, the conversation about rural drivers that we drive really far comes up to get services and jobs and things like that. We talk about, replacing the gas tax with a mileage tax.
Oh.
But a lot of rural drivers, certainly not all, right, but many rural drivers do drive less fuel efficient vehicles. So from that standpoint, it isn't necessarily for those rural users, it is as big of an impact as it is on the rural users who drive fuel efficient vehicles today.
Let me give you an example. At the golf club that I belong to outside of Marysville, you pull in there, 90% of the vehicles are pickups. That's just what it's like. Different world.
So along those lines, I remember before in the last boom, okay, the economy, real estate economy, I was, anyway, there were school bus drivers in the Bay Area that were living in the Central Valley. So if you want to talk about equity, they're driving the farthest. They may or may not driving a F-150 or whatever, but they lower income, having to drive farther out of necessity because of cost of housing, not necessarily housing choice, but the least cost of housing. So, I think the challenge of the intent behind doing this user fee type of thing, basing it on what type of vehicle you use, but then also trying to be equitable, it conflicts with one another, right? Because you're creating an environment where a disadvantaged community is having to pay more because they have to drive farther because their cost of housing is more, or for them to afford a house, they've got to live in a cheaper area. So anyway, I look forward to the conversation about this.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Do you? Sure.
Yes.
Doesn't happen.
But it will.
If someone's gonna go out and close up, or no matter what happens. It's painful for somebody.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
and presenting.
thank you.
Yeah,
This is
appreciate
awesome.
it.
Thank
you.
Once you clean it up,